Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Inform New Hampshire. We're broadcasting from Manchester Public Television, Channel 23. We air on Monday evening, 6:30, Thursday morning, 7:30, Saturday, 9 a.m., Sunday, 2 p.m. You can also view us on YouTube. We have a YouTube channel called Inform New Hampshire. We would love for you to go there and subscribe to our channel. Like us if you are inclined to. If you'd like to contact us via email, it's on the screen there, informnh@hushmail.com. For those of you who haven't seen our shows, we're basically giving you information that you will not hear in the mainstream media. Richie and I, Richie's my co-host here to the right. Today we have a guest, Pat Murphy. Richie and I are state coordinators for the National Liberty Alliance, and we believe National Liberty Alliance has a solution to America's problems, that being the common law grand jury, the reinstatement of the common law grand jury, which is a God-given right to us, we the people, to use the common law grand jury to root out corruption within government. We believe our country is in great peril, and we're here to spread the news and information that you won't get from the mainstream media. They're actually forbidden to provide it for you. So that being said, let's get on with the show. Richie, you want to say a quick few things first?
Yeah, speaking of rooting out corruption in government, I do want to say something. A good friend of ours, Mike Gill, is running for governor of New Hampshire. And I'd like to ask people to share this video with your friends and look into Mike. He has a show called, it's all on YouTube, The Fix, which exposes the corruption in this state. He also has on YouTube a radio show called The State of Corruption. Well, State of Corruption. I don't know if the word "thou" is in there. But Mike is risking it all, including his life, for the people of New Hampshire, for your children, your grandchildren. He's really putting it all on the line. And I'm with Mike, because I intend to do it for the next generation, too. I'm putting my life and everything else on the line. I'd like you to ask you to do the same thing. If he's standing out there alone, he's a target. If he's standing out there with several thousand people around him, he's not a target. So I'm asking for your support. And that's basically the end of that particular topic. But we did bring Pat back because I enjoy listening to Pat Murphy. I think he's one of the brightest historians that I know. Or he is, excuse me. Not, I don't think he is. He is. And he's right here local in New Hampshire. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Pat and let him start. We'll have plenty of questions, I'm sure.
Thanks. I'm just an average guy out in the woods with a chainsaw. That's all I am.
Yeah, you are, aren't you?
Chainsaw in a history book.
But I've always taken an interest in history since I was a kid. Back in the 50s when Manchester was a slower community, and some of your main drags are dirt roads, and the big thing towards the summer was to see who could get the dirtiest feet. Yeah. You're excited about leaving school because you wouldn't have to wear shoes. It was a totally different time. Of course, you didn't have TV, and linoleum floors, and if somebody got wall-to-wall carpeting in one room, it was a big thing, so you read a lot, and you were very conscious of history.
Did they have electricity back then?
We had electricity. Yeah,
Smart
we were
guy.
some of the wealthy ones in the neighborhood. But a lot of guys didn't have cars. You watch guys brown bagging it all the time.
Yeah.
But I would say one of the big differences between then and now is that people, they had more of a sense of being involved in the history of the nation.
Yeah.
There was a historian named Robert Heilbronner, and he wrote a book called The Future of History. Yep. And he mentioned that our current generations, they seem to be adrift in an historical void. Yep. They don't seem to be quite connected to the great liberal democratic experiment in the history of the nation. For my part, I got interested real young in that I was in a place I wasn't supposed to be at a certain time, or was supposed to be. I snuck downstairs as a youngster, and there was a bedroom off the living room, and I could listen to my uncles and my father talk about the Second World War, so I knew things that nobody should have known at that age, which were quite powerful. And I had an interest at that point, saying, why do these things happen, and what was that? How could somebody survive something like that? Because the stuff I heard would be, even for an adult, it would be beyond what an adult should know. You fellas, with what you're doing, is educational. From my understanding, you're trying to bring information to people on what their heritage is, what their bequeathment, their legal bequeathment is, that we seem to have lost our way in terms of understanding what it is that makes us, that gives us special protections. And though I don't know a lot about exactly what you do, you guys are deeper into it than a lot of people are. It seems that you really are moving forward and doing something positive, for yourself, for the nation, and I commend you for that. And the last time that we were here, we spoke briefly about a number of issues, and one of those was a central issue on the Constitution, which is the sanctity of private property. And we had spoken about the Blue Ways, this federal land grab that not that many people are even aware of. The entire Connecticut River for 400 some odd miles and 7.5 million acres and all the aquifer and everything connected with it. And it's something that we need to pay attention to and call our reps on and see if we can extinguish this thing. It's been done in other states.
And what legal authority are they using to take that land?
Just by imperial dictate. It didn't go through any legislative process. It's just the Secretary of the Interior waving his arm, like Christopher Columbus saying, I claim this in the name of the federal government. And, of course, very few people realize that.
Does he have a flag?
The private property, if you look at it, it's central to everything in the nation. And if you go back to the Founding Fathers, everyone is a student of John Locke. John Locke's treatise on two nations is a primary document. But you go deeper into history and you can find as good or better an evaluation and a treatise on that in Thomas Aquinas. So even in the Catholic tradition, you find tremendous emphasis on private ownership of property. If I had to describe it, I would say that private property, naturally, it's a guarantor of economic liberty, and everything comes from that. All wealth comes from that. But it's a protective conduit for the values, for the ethics, for the religion of the family down through history. There's a famous rabbi named Norman Lamb that gave an exposition on that, on how history is carried on through private property. And then if you look at modern history, particularly the 20th century, you watch assaults on private property as a conscious effort to destroy the family, to obliterate history. And specifically, when you look at the history of the Soviet Union, you could see, as we mentioned the last time, that Lenin defined communism as primarily and simply the absolute obliteration of private property, first and foremost.
Well, that's what's happening here, modern history of the United States.
Well, this country now for the longest time, the last time we were here, I put this document out, the Earth Summit Agenda 21, United Nations document. This is a very real issue, and if you pull up on your computer Agenda 3030, that's this document on steroids, and you will probably fall onto the floor looking at what they plan just 15 years from now. It's a very, very, very frightening thing. But if you look at the core of this document, it's totally at loggerheads with what this nation's based on. This is essentially, it's a biocentric document. The human being is reduced to matter. In fact, to matter that's in a way. This will hold that trees and wildlife have a superior position to the human being, that the human being is destructive, and it almost indicates a need to be eradicated. So when you look at this, and this is in planning in each and every town, I don't care what town it is, some 600 cities in the United States has a program where this is instituted. It's something that it comes in underneath the radar, but it circumvents everything the country is based on.
Well, I wanted to say something. This is Agenda 21 here. You see the size of the book. And this is the United States Constitution. This is law. This is bovine scat right here. Mm-hmm. Yet they're furthering this and trying to bury this. And the reason that it's happening is because you don't know this book. We don't know this book. We forgot it. We need to center ourselves around this. And the reason Pat's here is to talk about how his knowledge of history can bring you back to this and help you understand it.
That's right. If you take this book right here, when you look at the Constitution, you'll see federal, state, county, local government involved in the construct of this. With this system right here, everything's broken down into regional systems, which is, it's antithetical to everything that's in this book. Those are socialist control mechanisms. And then if you look at what's in your schools, and I just saw one of these documents this week come into my house from one of the local schools. Your Common Core is an interlock with this document that will supplant this document. These kids are being totally cut off from their history. And not only that, if you look at some of the math problems involved in Common Core, and what you have is you're taking an entire population and you're teaching these kids there are no absolutes. This document will teach you that there are absolutes.
What's the end game, Pat, for this Agenda 21? What's the point?
The point on that, the primary point on that, is to eliminate this.
Well, what happens to us?
Well, if you take a look at that, it creates scarcity. It concentrates populations. It ends private property. It ends private transportation. It's antithetical to any of the traditional religions that comprise Western civilization, whether they're Judaism, whether they're Catholicism or Protestantism. Any of those that teach resistance, the Catholic concept of a just war, they're pushed out of the way. But you'll notice that they do accept religions that teach subservience to authority.
Yeah.
Those are okay. You can do that.
You can control people.
In itself, this becomes a type of 21st century religion where the human being, if you look at Western civilization, you look at Christendom, the human being is up here. It's God's creation. He is an image of God, and it's a restraining force on government. This eliminates all of that, and your new God is nature. And the individual becomes nothing. Now, getting back to...
Well, it seems to me part of that religion is the eugenics that they call it.
Absolutely.
And the elimination. I've heard it said, and I know, coming from the White House science czar for Obama, he wrote a book in the 70s. What's his name?
All of
I can't
those
remember
are...
his name, but yeah, they talk about the elimination of all 95% of us, so that the 5% can live however they want. And
We've lost our moral compass.
Yep.
That's basically
That's what it's all about, is losing the moral compass. If you look at one of the prime designers for this document, that would be Maurice Strong. And you hear all of these things about Maurice Strong coming from Canada as a 23-year-old, coming out of the Canadian wilderness, the frost-laden trees, as a genius and inventing drilling mechanisms and becoming a multimillionaire and then wanting to save the planet. I thought about that. I said, Maurice Strong, who's that name rings a bell. And I'm thinking Anna Louise Strong, who was a Stalinist hack writer from the 30s, hardcore communist, lived through the Russian Revolution, and then eventually went to become an intimate with Mao Zedong and Chu Enlai, buried in China, is Maurice Strong's aunt. So you could see the connection all the way through here. But if you didn't have a background in history, you wouldn't comprehend that. So,
well, they are bloodline fanatics, aren't they? From what I've heard.
yeah, kind of, yeah.
It's frightening stuff. But I submit that these, getting back to the Common Core, if you look at the way things are set up, they're teaching these kids there are no absolutes. Therefore, you get into a class, if you have 10 kids, and 9 of them say 2 and 2 is 8, they're correct. And one that says 2 and 2 is 4 is wrong. And what they're teaching is that there are no absolutes, and the collective will determine what the truth is from moment to moment. Mm-hmm. Therefore, everything comes from the top down. It's what they called in the Soviet Union democratic centralism. The decision is made at the top, and it comes down to it's maybe debated at the top amongst people at the very, very top. But then once that filters down to the various councils, that's it. It becomes law. It's no longer subject to debate. So in a sense, these kids are being brought into that. They're being brought into that mold.
That's what he brings up, the example of the talking points of mainstream media, and I've seen some YouTube shows where news programmers across the country, different flashes of them using the same word on the same day because they all got the same news document.
No, they're
News
being
document.
they're being indoctrinated, and what you really have to do to counteract this is the kids have got to start to study history at an early age. Like I say, I discovered it through happenstance. I was in a place that I shouldn't have been, but they need to have a background in Western civilization, and when they're young, it should be a positive thing. So they should be taught the things that protect them. You know, the idea of natural law, the idea of the Bill of Rights, the idea of the Founding Fathers, the tremendous bravery that was shown, what these guys lost, and any of those things. And then if you bring them into the harder events, it would be something like maybe the Battle of Bunker Hill or down on board the USS Constitution, and introduce them to the proper literature so that they're able to think historically. They have cut away the ability to think historically within a nation.
That brings up another point, Pat, I wanted to ask you. Can you illustrate a correlation between the way we're losing our freedoms here in America as opposed to another country historically, and how it ties in? I mean, I'm thinking of
There's a lot.
Europe right now,
Yeah.
because we're trailing them, I think.
Well, you can see things happening in Germany right now in that you have people processed. When you watch, the public urinations, defecations, rape of women, the elderly, and gang rape of infants, and you don't see a strong response from a lot of the male population. That's a country that's been processed, and it's abnormal, actually. But if I had to think of an example in a 20th century of somebody losing their freedom, similar to the United States, it would be the loss of freedom in Czechoslovakia at the end of the Second World War. Czechoslovakia came out of, it was the ideal creation of the Treaty of Versailles at the end of World War I. It was the crown jewel of their creation. And it was an industrialized state with a large middle class, very skillful people. They had democratic institutions. They were very turned off to the West because they had been treated very badly at Munich by both Chamberlain and Daladier in France. They were basically sold down the river. And you had of course, the war ended. The Soviet Union had come into part of Czechoslovakia. Part of it they had freed themselves. The United States was in a portion of it. And what you had was, people behind the scenes, parallel institutions that were communist. They would be similar to what you have with these czars. And then what they began to do was they began to tax the businesses to the point where they almost couldn't survive. And they artificially created inflation within the country. And they took their military and they took their most patriotic elements. If any of them had been in a resistance against the Nazis, those people were pushed out. They were pushed aside. They were shunted out. Any of those that had done virtually nothing and had no potential military career, they were brought into positions of authority within that military. And then what you had was the police forces were consolidated. And all the time that this was being done, the people that were doing this, though many admitted that they were communists, they paraded themselves as patriots, as nationalists, as having a great future for the country, and they appealed to younger people. They changed the voting age from 21 to 18, and they created a national crisis and called for martial law. And what you had was, within 3 years, this country totally, through a quasi-legal parliamentary processes, became a communist nation. They considered that to be their greatest success, and that information came out with one of their historians by the name of Kozak. That's called the Kozak Letter, where they were bragging about what an extraordinary success they had to be able to take a country like this and turn it upside down through stealth, and that would be the model applied to the United States of America.
Was George Soros involved in that?
No, but the funny thing is, you bring up guys like George Soros. In the 20s and 30s, if you study the history of the Soviet Union and what they did going into the different countries that they went into, because they did right from the get-go, you always had people that they called millionaires in coattails. If you go back to the Russian Revolution, there's a fellow named Parvus. He's nicknamed Parvus. He trained Leon Trotsky, and he was a multimillionaire Alexander Gelfand is his name, and you would think right off the bat, because they had so much money, that they would not consort with people that were talking about a redistribution of wealth. But the thing is, you've always had people like that, and they enjoy I think they enjoy the power, and they enjoy being able to pull the strings and control events and move events. And once Russia eventually goes into a Bolshevik revolution and a horrific civil war, he'll leave and live out the rest of his life just in drunken parties and doing the things that he wanted to do. But Soros is not unique. You've had them all the way through the 20th century, individuals like that.
Yeah. What are some of the telltale signs of an early dictatorship taking place?
Well, you watch the limitations on speech now that you're seeing, the call for stopping people from speaking. That's a huge issue. The call for disarmament, naturally, that is a huge issue. All the Second Amendment issues, they're very, very, very big.
Free speech zones.
Free speech is huge. I mean, it's how do you it took 8 months for Lenin to destroy free speech in Russia. That's an entirely different story.
Yeah.
Probably about the same in Germany. The problem you have in some of those countries is an acquiescence, people giving in. Particularly if you look at the educational side, you find that both in Russia and Germany. There was a standard joke in Germany, in 1928, 97% of the people voted against the Nazis. By 29, when it fell apart, all of a sudden they've made these huge inroads. And one of the group that changed rapidly was the German Teachers Association, university professors. And there was a joke in Germany at the time that it went something like this: what's the shortest amount of time that a human being can possibly measure? And the answer was, that is the amount of time it takes a German school teacher to change his affiliation to the Nazi Party. Terrible, I know. In Russia, you had a similar thing where they changed. I think I mentioned that the last time. It's called the Pokrovsky School, where they embarked on a zigzag pattern where they were going to change, and they used a lot of John Dewey's ideas, because Dewey was, of course, he was an atheist. That was their thing. They did away with lesson plans. They did away with homework. The teacher no longer had any status. A 12-year-old had the same authority in the classroom with a janitor, with a teacher, and they totally broke everything down within that school system. And it got to the point where years later, people would totally disrespect those teachers as simply being a mouthpiece for things that they knew simply weren't going to come true. They weren't going to live in a great country.
You can see that happening now.
Well, you're watching it. You watch this with Common Core, and I said that's why these things are so related to what you guys are doing. That there was a psychologist that I saw on television talking about this. That they have this young kids actually coming home and getting physically ill, vomiting at night from the stress of trying to do some of these problems in Common Core that are so convoluted and circuitous, and the parents are cut off. And the grandparents are cut off from being able to assist, and it's a horrific thing. It makes you wonder where are the fathers and where are the mothers in the country as far as stopping this type of abuse, because it's a horrific form of abuse. In my estimation, it's a terrible form of abuse.
Well, when you talk about the loss of the rights, you got just in the First Amendment, you got free speech. They put up free speech zones, or they have put up free speech zones around the country,
right.
Certain areas, just to get people used to it, because pretty soon it's going to be more and more frequent, and you get desensitized to it. You got the churches, the freedom of religion. The churches are all applying for the 501c3 tax-exempt status, which they don't need.
Mm-hmm.
But now the government's got a control over them. They got a hold on them.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can go into the right to assemble freely. They charge you for a permit to assemble.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you want to go into redress of grievances, not only do they not do it in the federal government, they don't do it here in New Hampshire. That's not even honored anymore. Try it and see.
Well, you see, this system, this right here, when you look at what you have in the Constitution, actually, in the United States of America, it's like some historians would say, there's a lack of a system. You have a maximum amount of freedom. If you know how to behave ethically and a lot of that comes from the family, in private property, from religious instruction, then there are not a lot of laws holding you down. So the reality is that right there is a lack of a system. It's a bare minimum. This right here is a total system on every aspect of your life. So the two they're at tremendous loggerheads with each other. They are butting heads.
The only thing that's missing on this one is the chain that goes around your ankle.
Well, that can happen. You've had that. You had a farmer in Detroit 2 years ago, and he had feral pigs, and that was supposedly against the law. And 7, 8 o'clock in the morning, you had armored cars coming out and SWAT teams with weapons. And the only difference between that guy and somebody living in the Ukraine in 1931 was that they didn't pull a trigger. It shouldn't exist in the United States.
75 armed federal agencies, Pat, today. 75.
Yeah,
For what?
Not right.
Well, they're buying a lot of ammo, too. We're close to being out of time here.
Already?
I just want to say a couple things. Once again, the National Liberty Alliance has a legal and lawful solution to America's problems. You can find them on the web at nationallibertyalliance.org. Richie and I hold weekly meetings here in Manchester every Wednesday evening, 6:30 p.m. This Wednesday, however, we've changed our meeting to Saturday to accommodate some out-of-town guests. And so anybody's welcome to those meetings. I do want to mention once again that my co-host here, Richie, is running for sheriff of Hillsborough County. You will not find a more principled and honorable man who keeps his word and will absolutely keep his oath to the Constitution. Proud to be his friend, and I hope that you folks will assist us in getting the word out that Richie Merritt is running for sheriff of Hillsborough County, and he will not be working for the banks. Anything else? Did you want to mention Jerry DeLamus' website to contribute to?
Yeah, Jerry DeLamus' website, for those of you who might want to contribute to his legal fund, is www.patriotjerry.com. And I'm sure him and his wife would appreciate some assistance. Thank you.
Jerry is a political prisoner. He was tagged by the FBI and the BLM for being out west. The trumped-up charges against him are ridiculous. But it's an overreach of government, and they are trying to intimidate others from speaking up. Susan DeLamus is his wife. God bless you both. Susan DeLamus is a representative for New Hampshire, a state representative, and so appreciate it if any of you would make a contribution to them. Jerry was the breadwinner, and Susan is working hard to keep the house afloat. So, having said that, thank you so much for watching. Pat, really appreciate you being here. It's just lovely listening to you.
Thank you to
talk.
Pat Murphy.
Yeah, and I hope that
He'll be a regular fixture soon.
hope you come back often, and thank you again for watching our show.
Thanks.